Some years ago, uh, I was on the Muncie bus going from Muncie to Manhattan. It was the Minion bus. Uh, for those that are unaware, there's a bus service that takes the commuters with a. There are certain buses that have a minion that go to Manhattan, go to Brooklyn, from Muncie on a daily basis, other than Shabbos, of course. It's a fully equipped minion, has a Sefer Torah. Uh, some of those buses used to pull over to the side for Shmon Esrei to let people stand without being shaken so much and moved around. But more later years, I think that almost all of the buses I was on did not stop for Shmon Esrei. They kept going. After the davening, is a fully equipped minyan, like I said, the Sefer Torah, everything, even somebody offering l'chaims afterwards for whatever yahrzeit it might have been or might not have been. The afterwards, someone who's a regular there, they took note that I wasn't one of the one of the people that davens there on a regular basis, and he asked me how I handled it. I told him, first of all, I daven very frequently, more frequently on El Al than I do on the Muncie bus, so I'm accustomed to the gyrations and ups and downs. And number two is that I've thought of it like there was a British philosopher, Whitehead, that talked of what he called a lovely term he used, the fallacy of misplaced concretion. He said, on a microscopic level, if you study the what seems to be stationary, the ground, the floor of any surface that you happen to be occupying, on the molecular level, there's a lot of activity taking place. The protons, electrons, they're moving, but they stay within certain confines, and it creates a certain illusion of being stable, stationary. In a certain sense, we could make the case that there's something more accurate, more authentic about realizing that the floor under your feet is in motion. There's activity, there's action, it's in flux. The world is not frozen. The world changes. Right? What was what was the world like at this time a year ago, 2 years ago? And what's the world like now? And the Banishams are helping. We're davening. It should get back to where it once was. So there's a fallacy of an illusion of misplaced concretion. I want to borrow that term and use that. Mesher Chochma says that on the Psukim in Chamishi, in Parshas Bo, that Moshe Rabbeinu transmits to these Kenim the mitzvah of Korban Pesach, and particularly Pesach, says Rabbi Simcha, represents the capturing of energies and inclinations that facilitate making the transition from Avodah Zarah, lahavdil, to being Shemet Torah mitzvahs. Jews in Mitzrayim, most were Ovdei Avodah Zarah. They had schusim going for them of family loyalty, purity, and a certain amount of communal dedication, but loyalty, but as we spoke about last week, but the they were over the Avodah Zarah, and the Korban Pesach is they're being asked to take the very idolatry of the Mitzvah, and now 4 days before they have to actually bring the Korban to inspect it, to go public on the fact that they are now taking that Avodah Zarah and going to use it for a mitzvah. Shocking, right, to the culture, the nation in which they find themselves. So Meshech Chochmah puts forth this description that given that a human being is this combination of idea, conceptual, neshama, and of body, he has to translate from one realm into the other for something to be meaningful, for something to be incorporated into his life in an authentic fashion. And so there's a language. There's a language of the soul, and there's a language of the body. And it must translate from one language to the other. The language of the soul is thought, but it cannot, since we're locked into our bodies during this sojourn on this earthly planet, and we then have to translate from one language to the other, from the language of thought to the language of action. There's an urgency to do that. In fact, I remember Baron Feldman, when he was in Har Sameach, presently Rosh Shiva in Neyasal in Baltimore, Baron was fond of saying that every mitzvah is an act of creativity, and every creative act is transferring from the realm of spirit, idea, to the experiential, to make it empirical, to make it concrete. And so Rabban was going in that direction. And that is where the Meshech Chochmah was leading us. And that is that the human being is essentially in a constant state of entertaining sensitivities, ideas, insights, that he feels an urgency to transfer from the language of thought to the language of the body, articulating it, communicating it to himself and to the world. Mishchu ukru, take those, draw those inclinations that you have to make this kind of a transition from the idea to the physical, and take them, and you're going to utilize them now in a positive, productive way that will bring about this ideal interaction between body and soul. Mishchu ku. Simple read. Mishchu ku is that take the seh that you have from the flock. Ku acquire one, if you don't own one. But Meshech Chochmah says, take this root reality of the human condition and let's transfer it, translate it into the realm of the experiential, speaking it, experiencing it. And there's a magnificent piece there. Now, what was Avodah Zarah? Avodah Zarah was, as Lahavdil Whitehead said, the fallacy of misplaced concretion. There is that sense of a need to transfer from one realm to the other, the idea to experience, and the misplacing of that, the distortion of that is the Avodah Zarah, taking the idea, the concept of the Ribono Shel Olam and reducing it to terms that are able to be concretized, which doesn't work for the Torah Jew, because the concept of the Ribono Shel Olam transcends any kind of reductionism that ani rishon v'ani achron, the Ribono Shel Olam is, as the Navi Yeshayahu teaches us, the Ribono Shel Olam was before the world that he created, will be after the world that he has created, has gone through its various levels of becoming experiential for the human beings that he, in his wisdom, decided, in his kindness, decided to bestow his munificence and chesed on. So the misapplication is the Avodah Zarah. That's the ultimate misapplication. He goes through a Meshech Chochmah, beautiful description of the early nations, great cultures that appeared, that had a tendency, that mythology of theirs, Lahavdil, is full of it, of idolatrizing people that had great talents, genius, capacities in certain areas, and idolatrizing them. He talks even about holy places, Mekaymas, Kadeshim, is that for the Torah Jew, it's always in the present tense that the Ribono Shel Olam is giving us now, Ashi Nosein Lechem, Eretz Yisrael, and the Mokom HaMikdash even is something which is historically earned its unique relationship to the Jew, to the nation, in history, and for the future, its place, because it's connected to events that happened and events that will happen, not be'etzem, essentially. That's why Sinai encounter, Torah received on Har Sinai, but the Kedusha, the sanctity, doesn't last there, because the Ribono Shel Olam is the only source of Kedusha, of that sanctity. Again, a word that we have a hard time translating into English, but he has designated it for a certain space in time. Eretz Yisrael, the Mokom HaMikdash, in the future Mokom HaMikdash, because he is rededicating that to Ribono Shel Olam. It's connected, it's rooted in the past of the events. There's where Adom HaRishon brought his korban. That's where Yitzchak was brought on Har HaMoriah. And in the future, the first Beis Mikdash, the second Beis Mikdash, not accidental in that place, and ultimately the third Beis Mikdash b'mheira b'yameinu. And the difference then, lahavdil, about a sense of what is called holy in worldly terms, is that it is be'etzem, essentially holy, independent of any kind of assignment, designation from the Ribbon Shalom in history and for the future, just that be'etzem, it was given that, and it is self-sustaining. It's a non-Jewish idea. And so the Meir Simcha says in this brilliant, beautiful piece, he says that there isn't a single inclination, need that a human being has that cannot be found within Torah in some halachically praiseworthy manner, halachically consistent manner, whether it's his biological needs, his psychological needs, and his sociological needs. Everything is there. Yes, the loyalty to being part of a group and a team, it can be distorted, and people can be, lo aleinu, lahavdil, killed at soccer games, or there can be on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, that the sanctifying these emotional inclinations and needs to give them a positive expression. And so this is going to be a primary thematic difference for the Torah Jew, is that the world, the physical world, is not to be rejected, but it's not to be idolatrized. It's to be captured as an energy, harnessed, and becomes a conduit for translating into positive terms. He learns the Chazal, or the Gedolei Sidus learn that as well, that the Rotza Kodesh Baruch Hu Lezakos, the Rebbeinu Shem wanted to, most people read it, to give merits, Lezakos, to Klal Yisrael, is he increased the amount of Torah and mitzvahs that they would have. Ramei Simcha, and there are those amongst the Gedolei Chassidus who read it that way also. The Zakos also means to purify. The Rebbeinu Shem wanted Lezakos, Shem Zayah Zach, it's pure, wanted to purify these needs and inclinations of man, not to deny them, to purify them, translate them into the perfect expression of the unity between body and soul, initially pulling opposite directions, capturing and harnessing those needs. And the medium to facilitate that is going to be the Korban Pesach, which is making that happen at that moment in Mitzrayim, when the Jews are being now dipping in to the uniqueness of the relationship that had been carved, a space and time and soul and place in the world by the Ovos, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, to have this new unique nation that will be able to translate idea into reality. And the Rebbeinu Shem gives them mitzvahs, Torah, to purify the mind, the thought process, to move us in the right direction, to know how and what to do as far as the mitzvahs, and the actual empirical experience of the mitzvah as it impacts the soul. Rameh Simcha mentions over there a very esoteric Gemara and Avei Psochim of certain sounds, slogans that were used to motivate a lion, an ox, camel, to get them to move to certain sounds that were attuned to their hearing and the norms of how they respond to sound and the voice. Then it gives repetitive sounds, one after another, for the particular sound, for the aryeh, for the lion, for the shor, repetitive sounds, because the animal doesn't need diversity and versatility of orientation. Then it talks about the bargemen. There were bargemen that used to have in these flat bottom boats and very, very shallow waters that had big ropes that had to be sometimes used. The bargeman had to jump out in the shallow water when the barge got stuck on a shoal and pull. And there that's used a number of different sounds, not articulating repetitively the same sound. Says Meir Simcha, that's because the human mind, the soul of the human being, needs chidush, needs innovation, needs a fresh way of looking at something. And therefore, unlike the animal, is going to need different sounds in a medley of motivational sloganing. Concludes Meir Simcha. That's why normally we're always looking for another fresh way of trying to envision what is our traditional urgency and orientation and responsibility, a chiddush. That's what's happening in the Beis Medrash all the time. And that's what's happening in the shiurim that hopefully that people are trying to share with their fellow Jews and their chavrusas in their learning that goes on constantly in re-energizing the mitzvahs per se. Freshness, chidush. But, says Meir Simcha, somebody finds himself in a moment where he's been reduced to the level that he has capitulated to the Yetzer Hara. He's standing in front of the McDonald's with the cheeseburger in his hand, lo aleinu, and he's about to bite in. So over there, that's not the time for chiddush. Then he's been reduced to the animalistic urgency of giving primacy to his appetites, and therefore he needs a repetitive sound. Yotza schora behefseda, the gain isn't worth the price. That should be repeated. You're not in that state, Baruch Hashem, then surely the order of business is imagination, creativity. Let's try and find a fresh way of understanding the newness of a world that's constantly in flux. And so as we live through these days of the amazing uh, challenges and vicissitudes of just survival for the Jew, for the non-Jew in the world today. We take a certain amount of chizuk from the fact that historically the world has gone through such challenges, patches in history, and we hope, each one of us individually, we hope nationally, that Klal Yisrael will continue to be a, this kind of awe, a light, a beacon to the world. It's very strange, the messages the Rebbeinu Shem seems to send along the way. Going to need a lot more time to really interpret more accurately, but surely there are impressions that at the outset of the COVID plague, Israel was seemed to be the least affected. Statistically, it was a phenomenon. And then boom, 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 it all changed very quickly. Why? We can only theorize and guess. But it would seem that there's a message there. And today, again, simultaneously, bebasachas, lo aleinu, the bad news of the amount of the contagion and sickness, staggering, out of proportion. And simultaneously, the efficiency, the siyata deshmaya to have the vaccination be so quickly arrived in Eretz Yisrael and administered around the country. Again, yes, we heard that the CEO of Pfizer is a Greek Jew, that a son of Nitzolei HaShoah, people that were survivors of the Holocaust that made it from Greece, Salonika, to America. And he remained with a pride in his origins. Hashkocha. Why he was in that place? And it's a Jew that has helped Israel, the world, get the vaccination so quickly. People were so pessimistic initially. Shem Yitain, that we should draw the right conclusions, translate from idea to action in our behavioral norms, and merit, deserve the Yeshuas and Refuas that the Rebbeinu Shalom were davening for him to translate into tangible realities for the collective community and for the world at large. Shem Yitain Yeshuas Refuas and Pseres Tevis to everybody.